Hi, I'm Nina. This is the second episode of Unfiltered, and I run strategy and growth here at Causal. And I am joined today by Nina Kaplan and Christy Fite. And we are going to be discussing a little bit about CTV, linear, all things video, focused on the political space, but also a little bit in general. And though I usually introduce the guests today, they go way back, so I'm gonna let them introduce each other.
Great. Well, I'll introduce Christy first. So Christy has over 15 years of experience in media planning and buying. She's one of the smartest strategists out there. And she's worked across the board in political, in corporate, retail, personal injury lawyers. So she's seen and done literally everything under the sun.
And this is Nina Kaplan. She has over 8 years of experience in media planning and buying, including 6 years at RTI with two presidential cycles. Some of her top clients there included Rosen, Voto Latino, the D Trip, DSCC. And in her free time, she is a world traveler, loves to read books, big Harry Potter fan, and competes in triathlons. So,
She
yeah.
does.
Yeah,
Very
in all of her
impressive
free time.
sport.
Yes.
Uh, okay, I'm gonna throw the first question your way. So for both of you, what capability will separate the best media teams from the rest this year? Is it data integration, cross-screen optimization, supply path discipline, creative testing, or any other thing that you can think of?
I think if I had to pick one, it's definitely the cross-screen optimization, just because we can tie that to outcomes in such a unique way. Especially when we're like identifying audiences across linear CTV, mobile, desktop, having real-time optimizations and reallocations occur based on reach and like CPAs. We just have all of this technology available to us to make those last minute changes to really make sure that campaign dollars especially are going so far and reaching that target audience. And then on top of that, like with creative sequencing, we can like really tell a full story from A to B in getting voters educated and then passionate about politics and then hopefully lead them to the polls. What about you, Christy?
Just to take that one step further, I know this is going to be something that we talk about later, but the fragmentation of the media landscape and going about the cross-screen integration, making sure that you come in with a real holistic approach. Every touch point matters, but not every touch point is the same. And so making sure that with that frequency, if you're buying linear TV, you don't want that frequency at 22 because you're just shouting to the same people. So how are you making sure that your campaign is not getting to the point where you're saturating the same people over and over again and making sure that every touch point is utilized in the best way possible? I think it's going back to what you just said, the very quick movement from tactic to tactic, making sure that you are being very nimble. What works one week is going to be different because the news is constantly changing. So you have to be very quick in your response. And as much as we try to plan ahead, you have to be able to pivot. So I think a lot of what Nina said is spot on.
And on that point of fragmentation, do you both see fragmentation accelerating or stabilizing over the next cycle? Since I know that you both have worked multiple cycles and have kind of seen it evolved throughout the years, and we have primaries coming up. So,
I think this is a really fascinating question for like two parts. One, I think structurally it's going to be accelerating, but tactically, campaign managers are going to be consolidating. So, like structurally, we're going to see more inventory pools. I mean, just think about in the last 2 years how many fast channels, ad tiers, live streaming sports has just exploded. And there are more frameworks, there are more walled gardens. And especially since we're seeing ad platforms on Netflix and Disney Plus really like start creating these walled gardens that are harder to get into. That doesn't really like reduce fragmentation. We're like monetizing off of it. But then from like a campaign media buying perspective, we're actually consolidating within the programmatic space or within these direct publisher buys, where we're thinking, okay, maybe we pick our top 5 to 7 publishers, we curate a PMP stack, we have direct CTV deals. And so like from an operating standpoint and a buying perspective, you're actually kind of consolidating those. So.
You bring up a really good point about the consolidation. How do you view the movement of dollars from linear to streaming? And then how, because with a lot of clients, they're hesitant to bundle it all together and they still have that mindset that they are siloed. So how do you get them to a comfort level where video is video, regardless of how it's served?
I think the best example of this, especially among sports viewers, is 20 years ago when you wanted to watch NFL. You would just turn on
It
your
wasn't 20 years
TV.
ago. It was closer than that. Don't age me that much,
We
Nina.
can we
It
can
is
talk about
15
the rise
years,
and
but no.
fall of cable. The true fall of cable was 2016, but I'm not sure we're ready to talk about that. So let's say 10 years ago, right?
There we go.
NFL, there were really only two major modes of watching it. It was via a cable subscription, and then maybe via your cable subscription, you had access to watching it on your laptop. Now, if you want to watch NFL, there's like 15 different platforms depending on the game, depending on who owns that inventory and specific games at this point,
Yep.
that you're going across the space of ESPN, YouTube TV, NFL Direct, on top of this, cable buy. And so I feel like linear truly isn't being cut. We're just from a digital perspective, it's being protected from waste. So you can still invest into linear, but then use digital dollars to take that reach and go further and really hone in on a specific audience in a way that linear just doesn't have the capability to do.
I, yes, I agree. And I wanted to ask Christy, because you work so much within, well, we work so much within the digital space and being adjacent to linear and helping that and helping move that, what have you found has usually been the best explanation when someone doesn't really understand how those go hand in hand? Because I for one have seen a lot of the time that we run into an issue where they say that they're completely different, that they don't complement one another at all. And at the end of the day, they do. And then through it, you can actually move your audience or find a younger audience, etc., through multiple different other stages within the digital space. So, yeah.
I think a lot of it has to do with just breaking it down into very simple terms. Because if you think about the streaming platforms out there, they sound made up. I mean, I remember the first time a sales rep came in and talked to me about Fubo and like Tubi, and I was like, what is this? And now it's making sure that people understand that these are legitimate companies. These are legitimate platforms where people are tuning in to consume their video, but really break it down to asking the question, how are you watching TV at home? Are you turning on? Do you have a cable box? If not, most people now have smart TVs. So, okay, they have a Roku TV, and then they're going through the ESPN app and making sure that they understand, okay, that is streaming, that is CTV, that is where we're trying to reach those voters, or if it's general, not political, their audience, their target consumer. So really making sure that they understand that it's all integrated right now. One of our colleagues, Chris, does a great job of showing the spectrum guide if it through the cable box and the spectrum guide through the app. And they're one and the same. So it's very confusing for somebody who thinks that they're watching cable, but it's actually through their app because it's the same exact template. So that is a great graphic to show to somebody like, no, you're actually, this is CTV. It could be linear, and but in more often than not, people are consuming through CTV. They just don't know it because their habits are very similar to what they were before.
Nina, is there anything that you want to add to that or?
I think just, Christy said it well. And at the end of the day, the argument is no longer linear is dying. Linear is just no longer sufficient alone. And we need these CTV strategies to come in and help with frequency, help with control.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen in the space recently, and I think it's so funny, that CTV has now found ways, some partners have found ways to mimic linear within CTV and
Hmm.
show slots. And then I think it's fascinating that then you can actually start following people across what they're watching in CTV versus in linear, you have that then drop off because you can't follow the person. You're just going to be like, okay, I'll probably hit them at this time. I'll slot them in again. And I'm really interested in seeing the evolution and the connectivity moving forward to when we get to the time where we can say like, oh my gosh, I'm absolutely able to track like a one-to-one in CTV. I'm able to see all that data. I know we haven't gotten there 100%, but I'm very excited about that. And Chrissy and I always ask one another this when we're trying to strategize for how we help someone understand where to be putting their dollars and whatnot. But if you, Nina, were advising a CMO to reallocate budget between linear, live streaming, CTV, and fast right now, what would you prioritize and why? What would you tell them? Like, you have to be running on this, and this is why you should add these other channels.
I think that's a really interesting question, especially since it's so specific to the geo that we're talking about, right? Because there are still DMAs that like linear is your best bet. It is so efficient on like a cost per target scale. The dollar is going exactly where you need it to. But then we have these other congressional districts that are harder to get that like impact from a linear buy that you need to be investing in CTV and digital channels to create a halo effect and like really make sure that those hard-earned fundraising dollars actually reach those target voters. And so I think especially in the fragmented space, these pivotal pieces are those live moments that we see from linear. It's the live streaming of sports and news where people are still actively engaged and they're not just throwing it in the background, they're scrolling on their tablet and phone as well. Um, and even to combat that, like you still need to buy the mobile, you still need to buy the tablets of the world because every single touch point matters.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. I mean, I'm going to say something and Nina's going to laugh because this is something that we were taught when we were working together at the same agency. Nothing is a must buy in our industry because there's, especially now, there are so many other ways to reach that person. So what Nina was saying, like it really depends on the DMA and even the audience within that DMA. There are ways around it. So it really comes down to you really need to be very strategic and you have to come into it looking at all the pieces and trying to figure out what's the best puzzle for that goal. And if it's like getting people out to vote, getting them to vote a certain way on a ballot initiative, going to vote for a candidate, every puzzle is going to be slightly different. And so it's really figuring out the right pieces for that particular puzzle.
Okay. And then to that puzzle, what does a winning video strategy look like in 2026 compared to all the different times that you two have been running it for specific initiatives like in 2018 or in 2020?
That's a great question as well. I mean, like let's go back, Christy, to 2018. Let's like
Gosh.
really, take some time here. I feel like in 2018, things were still GRP led. Everyone was still speaking that linear language. It was linear first. Digital was an add-on. Even with digital, it was like, okay, we know social media is like a thing that people are tuning into and they're consuming on a regular basis. And like we hadn't even really thought about CTV. Like it was just still digital as a living room screen or as an add-on that I think we like negotiated free impressions on CTV that like ESPN would give you because you had secured a cable buy or an OTT add-on that was just like, here are your free digital impressions because this is a new emerging technology. There was limited deduplication metrics that we were able to track. And we just had very basic audience overlays and understanding of how people were consuming media. Fast forward to 2020, CTV became the hype word. That was like the big bang of CTV. I think the pandemic definitely impacted that, right? People were at home, they were in front of their living room TVs. Cable had become something that people were like, is that something I want to continue investing in when I can get HBO, Netflix, Disney? And so it became this like streaming surge that we haven't seen since, to be honest. And we kind of had a heavy reliance on platform reporting. There was no third-party verifications really. It was kind of the wild west of digital CTV consumption. And it was more fragmented by like, I want to say these major players investing in the CTV and into content, but no one really knew the effect of how people were really consuming. I mean, think about like Tiger King. Like that was the big thing that everybody was watching in 2020.
Like
And
a
like
fever dream. I'm
it
like,
it
what?
took off. It was a cultural phenomenon in early 2020, and like that launched a continuous surge of the streaming platforms and how people were consuming that type of content. Fast forward to 2026, people are actually taking an audience first, screen agnostic planning perspective, right? We start looking at reachable households, not networks. At the end of the day, like what someone's watching at 2 p.m. versus 2 a.m., I don't really care as long as they're actually the target audience I want to reach.
Mhm,
So I think Christy said this earlier, like there's no channel or network that you have to put into a media plan at this point.
mhm,
2016, I'm sure we could name the top five that every single campaign manager was like, we need to have this name brand CTV person in our plan. At this point, it's always on
mhm.
in the background. Someone's always going to be consuming media. We have so many ways of tracking data from clean rooms to publisher IDs to model attributions that like because we have all this data that we can bake in, we are able to optimize on such a granular level that we're not relying on network specific buys. And yeah, Christy, you want to add anything to that?
I mean, no, I just want to say mic drop. Like that was a beautiful way to respond. I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to having strong campaign managers and partners when it comes to the agencies, knowing the landscape, knowing who your actual audience is, and making sure that you're reaching them wherever they are consuming media. It might be cat videos on YouTube. That might be it, and that is okay. So I mean, this year, I think the buzzword is definitely going to be live sports because going back to 2016, everybody wanted to buy news because that was the one thing that people, in addition to live sports, but it was much smaller from a fragmentation, news was a tune-in program. Now, you get the news any which way you want. You can have it on your social media. You can, yes, you can tune in to the 11 o'clock news, but news is everywhere. It's 24 hours. Live sports is truly the tune in program rate of 2026. So I think that's going to be the buzz for this cycle. And I mean, everything that Nina just said, bravo, that was beautiful.
Thank
And
you.
Christy, not to pivot so much to live sports, but for live sports, how are you presenting this to a client when you receive pushback because sometimes you can't be buying specific slots of live sports because it's closed off, for example, to programmatic, or they don't understand that there are other places in which you can surround yourself, but it's still visible during the live sport that they want to be on,
Right,
or other important live sports that are happening, such as the Olympics,
right.
that they might not understand that can be bought via other areas or channels or ways. So how do you convince them about that, or how do you kind of bring it up in a more digestible way than being like, oh, this is exactly how it works on the back end, etc.
Right. I know that we keep going back to it, but I think the easiest way to present it is the NFL example that Nina referred to. So when I first started with media planning, on Sundays you had CBS and Fox, and then Sunday Night Football was always NBC, and then you had ESPN. Then a couple years later, NFL Network on Thursday night. Then Amazon came into the play. Now you have Netflix and Peacock, and in addition to all of that, you have YouTube TV and all the other different ways to even turn on to get to the program. So in order, if there's one particular game like the Super Bowl that you really want to be in, my advice is always go direct, because that way you can always guarantee that you have those impressions within that program. But if you are saying you want to be in NFL content and similar programming, or NFL content and college football, because that's going to be really big around the elections, the best bet is really to go programmatic, because then you're going to get the audience wherever they're consuming media. With college football, you have ABC, ESPN, NFL, or excuse me, Fox Sports. There's so many different networks. I remember going through the schedule and cherry picking which games I want to be on. And with college football, you never know how the team is going to do. Yes, okay, a couple years ago it was always Bama. Georgia's always going to do well. But then you have that Hail Mary team coming out of the woodworks, and you're like, how is that team doing so well? Well,
Like,
guess what? With programmatic, your impressions are going to be there, because that's where the demand is. Um, I think another thing that I was reading about, Formula One is becoming very popular here. And in addition to being within the races, I should say, there's so much additional programming about Formula One. Netflix has a whole documentary about it, and that's been a huge surge for the Formula One fan. So, yes, it would be great to be in the races, but also that is premium programming if you're in those type of programs. And so, yes, that might not necessarily be live sports, but you're still hitting that audience again where they're consuming media. So I think it's just digesting a little bit more and showing the full landscape of how it is right now. But again, if it's one singular tentpole event, your best bet is to go direct.
Good. And then you guys were talking about how nothing has to limit your plan. I wanted to ask you both, what is a structural mistake that comes from planning sometimes that you find that should be fixed going into 2026?
Christy, you wanna kick it off first?
Um, Again, you're gonna laugh at me with this. But something that Nina and I were always taught was a buy is never done until the invoice is paid. And so I think it's so incredibly important. Once a plan is set, we were always taught, like, you have to be nimble, you have to shift. And that is hard. It's because it's a lot of work. You put so much time and energy into a plan, but then if something changed, like something might come up, a poll might come out or something, and it's like, I have to change my entire video campaign, or especially if you're buying linear, and you might have to shift dollars to a different tactic. A battleground state, you might have put so much against streaming, and you might have some guaranteed inventory, but then there's a bunch of impressions that weren't guaranteed. So you might have to shift quickly to find another placement for it. I think the best advice I can have for planners and buyers: be flexible. Yes, it's a lot of work. Yes, you're going to hit your head on the table, but at the end of the day, you're going to have the best results if you go into it with that mindset.
That was so beautifully said.
Thank you.
I think the best teams in 2026, like Christy said, are going to be nimble and flexible, but I don't think they're necessarily going to buy the most premium inventory. They're going to reallocate faster than everyone else. They're going to cap smarter. And I think they're also going to prove incrementality more convincing than anyone else in the playing field. And it's going to be those teams that can work quickly to respond to the breaking news and the polls that are going to just make every single dollar go further and further than previous cycles.
That's actually a really great point. I really
I love that.
made. And then I'm gonna ask probably the last question. What is something that you two are both excited about for this cycle in 2026, and what's something that you two are really nervous about? in this cycle for 2026?
I mean, going back to the live sports, like this year specifically, there's just so much live sports happening. I mean, across like every single sport imaginable. Between now and October, you have, I mean, the Olympics on being right now is just something that I can't stop thinking about. And like now is honestly like a good time for campaigns to be starting. Lock in early, start talking to the base. And I think that that kind of leads to me where I'm nervous about. I specifically on the Dem side, I don't think we've quite learned how to allocate budgets across the entire cycle. Everyone throws money into September and October, but we really need to be talking to the base in
Yeah.
February, March. Like now is the time where you find your core target audience and you start layering in those messages and building that credibility, that visibility, that trust, so that come time when everyone is throwing money into the market, your voice is not lost because they already know that established presence. And so I think it's something that we see cycle after cycle that we look back and we're like, we should have started early. And I think one of my favorite campaigns that I've ever run is the Rosen campaign in Nevada because we started in March of 24. And we really identified those key target audiences. But then, like Christy said, we made changes based off of polling, based off of media consumption data. And so that plan that we put together in January is not the same plan that we ended with in November. And so I think that that is one case study where starting early, being nimble, got us to a point where she performed so well on election day. And it's not just one thing that we can pinpoint it to, it's all of these little things that stack up into a brilliant media plan.
I think that's the perfect way to end.
Okay, well, any last words, anything that you want to add to the convo that we had?
No,
Or
I just thank you so much, Nina. We really appreciate your time and all of
Thank
your
you
thoughts, your
both.
brain power today. It was really great talking with you again.